They say betrayal comes in the most unexpected forms, but what if it came from someone you love the most? This is the story of a single moment, a touch, a glance that unraveled everything I thought I knew about myself, my family, and the thin line between loneliness and desire. It all started with a simple touch. So innocent, so harmless. Or at least, that's what I told myself. That day at the beach was supposed to be a chance to reconnect, to spend time with my son Leonard while my husband Phoenix buried himself in yet another work commitment. 15 years of marriage had taught me not to argue when Phoenix said he couldn't make it. I was used to being alone, to holding things together for our family while he focused on his career. Leonard was 16 back then, tall, lanky, with those same deep brown eyes his father had, though his gaze was softer, more curious. He didn't complain when I told him it would just be the two of us. I suppose he was used to Phoenix's absence as much as I was. So we packed our things, loaded up the car, and set off for what I hoped would be a peaceful escape from the monotony of our routine. The drive was uneventful, just the quiet hum of the engine and the occasional sound of Leonard's music spilling faintly from his earbuds. I watched him out of the corner of my eye as I drove, thinking about how much he'd grown. It felt like just yesterday he was a little boy clinging to my hand as we crossed the street. Now he was nearly a man, and I couldn't help but wonder if I'd blink and lose him too, the way I'd lost Phoenix to his endless work. When we arrived at the beach, the sun was already high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the waves. We picked a quiet spot away from the crowds, spreading out our towels and setting up the umbrella. I remember feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin, the gentle crash of the waves in the distance. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. I laid down on my towel, closing my eyes, letting the sun's heat seep into my skin. It felt like a small escape from the weight I carried every day, the loneliness, the silence, the feeling of being unseen in my own home. And then I remembered the bottle of sunscreen in my bag. "Leonard," I said, turning my head slightly to look at him, "can you help me with this? I can't reach my back." He hesitated for a moment, just long enough for me to notice, but then he nodded, taking the bottle from my hand. I laid back down, my face resting against the towel as I waited. At first, it was nothing. His hands were gentle, careful, as he spread the oil across my shoulders. I smiled to myself, remembering how small his hands used to be when he was little, how he used to hold mine so tightly. "You can press a little harder," I said softly, my voice muffled by the towel. "It's okay." He did as I said, his hands growing more confident as they moved across my back. For a moment, I let myself enjoy it. It had been so long since anyone had touched me like this, so long since I'd felt anything at all. But then his hands moved lower, down the curve of my back, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. I told myself it was nothing, that he was just helping, that I was imagining the hesitation in his touch. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. His hands lingered at the edge of my towel, hovering there, and in that moment, I had a choice. I could have stopped him. I could have said something, moved away, made it clear that this was crossing a line, but I didn't. "It's okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You can rub there too." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous, and the moment they left my mouth, I knew I couldn't take them back. Leonard didn't say anything. He didn't stop. His hands moved lower, and I stayed silent, my heart pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. I wish I could tell you why I didn't stop him. Maybe it was the loneliness, the years of feeling invisible in my own home. Maybe it was the way his touch made me feel alive, wanted, seen. Or maybe it was something darker, something I didn't want to admit to myself. When we packed up and left the beach that afternoon, everything felt different. The air between us was thick with unspoken tension, and I couldn't bring myself to meet his eyes. But the worst part was the guilt, the shame that coiled in my chest like a snake. I tried to act normal when we got home. I made dinner, asked Leonard about school, folded laundry late into the night. But no matter how hard I tried to bury it, the memory of his hands on me stayed, replaying in my mind like a broken record. Phoenix didn't notice anything, of course. He came home late, as usual, his tie loose, his face tired. He kissed my cheek out of habit, a brief brush of lips that felt more like an afterthought than affection. "Long day?" I asked, hoping for some semblance of conversation. He grunted, nodding as he made his way to the living room without another word. It was always like this with him. His presence felt more like a shadow than a person, and I, once again, felt invisible. But Leonard noticed. He didn't say anything, but his silence was louder than words. I caught him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking. When I cooked, when I cleaned, when I sat alone on the couch at night. And I let it happen. I didn't stop him. The following weekend, Phoenix was gone again. Another late shift, another excuse. The house felt suffocating, the walls closing in on me. I asked Leonard if he wanted to go back to the beach, just the two of us. I don't know why I suggested it. Maybe I thought being outside would clear my mind. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that I could control this, whatever this was. The drive to the beach was quiet, the air between us heavy with unspoken tension. Leonard didn't wear his earbuds this time. He just sat there, staring out the window, his knee bouncing restlessly. When we arrived, the beach was nearly empty. The water sparkled under the afternoon sun, and the wind carried the salty scent of the ocean. We laid out our towels again, just like before, and I tried to pretend that everything was fine. But it wasn't. Even with my eyes closed, I could feel his gaze on me, the weight of his eyes trailing over my body. I didn't ask him to help with the oil this time. I couldn't. Instead, I laid there, motionless, the memory of his touch from the week before burning in my mind. The real breaking point came later that afternoon at the beach showers. We decided to rinse off before heading home, just to wash away the sand. It was supposed to be quick, routine, but what happened next is something I still can't fully explain. Leonard stepped under the stream of water first, letting it run down his back. I stood off to the side, watching him for a moment before stepping in beside him. The cool water hit my skin, and for a brief moment, it felt like everything might wash away. The guilt, the shame, the memory. But then I peeled off my outer clothing, standing there beside him in just my bathing suit. Leonard turned to look at me, his eyes wide with something I couldn't name. Surprise, confusion, or maybe something else entirely. "You should take off your shorts too," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "You need to rinse properly." He hesitated just for a second before doing as I said. And then there we were, alone under the stream of water, the world around us fading into a blur. I turned my back to him, my voice soft as I said, "Help me with my back." His hands were careful, tentative, as they moved across my shoulders. But the tension between us was unmistakable. When his touch drifted lower, I froze. The sound of the water seemed deafening, drowning out the voice in my head screaming at me to stop. Instead, I leaned back, closer to him, and reached for his hands, guiding them to where they shouldn't have been. What happened next was a blur. A desperate, reckless blur of need and loneliness and something darker that I didn't want to name. It wasn't soft, and it wasn't slow. It was raw, passionate, and wrong in every way imaginable. But in that moment, I didn't care. When it was over, we stood there in silence, the water washing away the evidence but not the truth. Leonard held me then, his arms wrapped around me like I was the only thing that mattered. And for the first time in years, I felt alive. The drive home was silent. Leonard sat stiffly in the passenger seat, his face flushed, his jaw tight. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to focus on the road, but my mind was spinning. I could still feel his touch, his hands, the weight of everything we'd just done. When we pulled into the driveway, neither of us moved. Leonard finally turned to look at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that terrified me. It wasn't guilt or shame. It was longing. "How long have you felt like this?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. I looked at him, my heart pounding in my chest, and whispered back the truth I didn't want to admit. "I don't know. Maybe longer than I want to admit." We sat there in the dark, the silence between us heavy with everything we couldn't say. And then Leonard leaned over and kissed me,